Hello, this is Jeff from Leathercraft. Today I'm going to share with you one of my favorite types of dyeing. It's very cool, has a very rustic appeal to it. And I'm going to start off with yellow. I'm going to take a piece of t-shirt, I'm going to wet it with some of the yellow dye. And then I rub the t-shirt onto some newspaper to get all the excess dye off. At this point, the t-shirt is at its wettest, so I always start on the edges because I'm going to turn that into a gradient anyway. When it's a little drier, I start working my way into the inside of the leather. I'm going to use this yellow as a foundational color, but you'll notice as you push down with the dye applicator, it will create darker and lighter areas of the dye. This will be more obvious when we use the darker colors. These fluctuations in the color patterns is really what brings this type of dyeing technique to life. I'm somewhat avoiding the areas between the stitching line because there's going to be a piece of leather that's going to be covering that areas anyway, but I still go ahead and dye it to a certain degree. It looks pretty bland right now, but it'll come to life as soon as we start adding the other darker colors. Now I'm switching to saddle tan. I love this color personally. You might have noticed I'm also going from lightest to darkest as far as colors are concerned. Once again, I wet the applicator and I rubbed it off on a piece of newspaper, and I started on the edges. Look how well those colors are working together. I just love using these different tones of browns. It's just beautiful. At this point, definitely apply different pressures, and as you're doing the edges, you don't want to cover up all the yellow that you put up there, so you just want to kind of, stagger it to a certain degree. Now you see I'm working my way into the leather. At this point, the applicator is somewhat dry, so I'm able to control the amount of dye that's being placed on the leather. Some areas you can see I'm pushing down harder. I'm trying to find key areas that just complement the yellow. Also, don't get in the way of yourself. Let it flow. Now we're switching over to light brown. I wanted to point out that I'm using Phoebe's water-based dye instead of the oil dye. I love oil dye, but I find this technique calls for the water-based dye because the way it dries. It doesn't dry as evenly. Where the oil-based dye will even out as time goes by, as it dries, this doesn't even out as much. So if you apply more dye to a particular area than the other, it most likely will remain darker than the other areas. So for that reason, it really helps in applying this technique. Look how nicely these browns work with each other. You can see as soon as you add these darker colors, it makes the lighter colors pop. Now we're working deeper into the leather, but just gently. Remember, you could always add more dye, more darker areas, but you can't take it away once it's there. It might lighten up once it's dry, but it's not going away. I have found that dyeing leather is somewhat unpredictable. It adheres to different leathers in different ways. Some leather has different tones. Here we are switching to dark brown. Whenever I create a craft using this technique, I always use a lighter color leather. This one is almost white. That way the colors really shine through. Whatever color leather you choose to use, always do some dye test on some scrap leather. That way you get an idea of how it's going to come out. I'm really liking how this dark brown is affecting the edges. The darker the dye, the less pressure is needed to apply it. But it's the difference of pressure that creates all these great tones. Now I'm adding oil to the craft. This is actually olive oil. I know a few saddle makers that use olive oil and they say it works excellent. And it does. I've been using it for years now. Watch the effect that the oil has on the dye. I mean, it really brings it to life. It's just got that great luster appeal to it. It makes a world of difference. The oil seems to also spread subtly the pigments of the dye, so it kind of blends a lot better. These are the two largest pieces of what's going to be a briefcase. I was happy I matched them pretty well. These are some of the straps I made for the briefcase. I used the same dyeing technique. Once again, look how much the oil makes a difference. It really does. And here are all the pieces to this briefcase I will construct. I bought this pattern from the company Creative All, AWL. It's an excellent pattern. It was a lot of fun. There was a lot of sewing. I was happy with the outcome and it was a great experience. You gotta hand it to these pattern makers. It's a lot of work. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I'm always watching YouTube videos to learn as much as possible about leather crafting. Please subscribe to the page, give me a like. It is very much appreciated. Take care.